For years, people made jokes about how careful I was with money and the life I chose. When something unexpected happened, their reactions completely changed. The first time someone called me cheap, it was meant as a joke, but it landed like a label that stuck. We were sitting at a long wooden table at a brewery downtown. Exposed brick, hanging lights, the kind of place where the menu does not list prices in big print. My friend Tyler had just ordered a round of craft beers that came in glasses shaped like science experiments. Everyone nodded like it was normal. When the waitress got to me, I ordered water. Not because I could not afford a beer. I had the money. It was sitting in my checking account, neat and untouched. I just did the math in my head. $9 for one drink. That was groceries for 2 days if I played it right. Tyler grinned and said I was still on my monk budget. Everyone laughed. I smiled too. It was easier that way. That was pretty much the rhythm of my 20s. People spent. I tracked. My name is Daniel Brooks. I am not flashy. I have never been. I grew up in a small house in Ohio with a father who lost his job twice before I turned 18 and a mother who stretched every dollar until it begged for mercy. I remember sitting at the kitchen table watching her balance a checkbook like she was defusing a bomb. Bills stacked in careful piles. Lights turned off in rooms we were not using. Coupons clipped and sorted like trading cards. Nothing dramatic happened. We were not on the street. We were just always close enough to the edge to see it. So when I got my first full-time job as a junior analyst in Chicago, I did something that confused people right away. I kept living like I was still broke. I rented a studio apartment in an old building instead of upgrading to one of those glass high-rises overlooking the river. My car was a used Honda Civic with a dent on the passenger door. I brought lunch to work in a plain black container while everyone else lined up for salads that cost $15 and came in biodegradable bowls. At first, the comments were light. Man, you make decent money now. Live a little. You are saving for what? The apocalypse? I would just shrug. I tracked every expense in a spreadsheet. Rent, utilities, groceries, gas. I had categories for everything. I knew exactly how much I spent each month down to the cent. There is something calming about that. Watching the numbers behave. My coworkers upgraded apartments the minute they got raises. They leased luxury SUVs. They booked weekend trips on a whim. I said no more than I said yes. No to the spontaneous Vegas trip. No to bottle service at clubs. No to buying the newest phone just because it came out in a new shade of blue. People started assuming things. That I was scared. That I did not trust myself with money. That I was secretly drowning in debt and pretending to be disciplined. One afternoon in the break room, I overheard a couple of guys talking. They did not know I was behind the fridge door grabbing my lunch. Bro, if I lived like Daniel, I would be depressed. Yeah, what is the point of making money if you are not going to enjoy it? I stood there holding my container of rice and chicken, feeling heat crawl up my neck. Was I not enjoying it? I went back to my desk and stared at my spreadsheet. My savings account had just crossed $50,000. My emergency fund was fully funded. I was maxing out my retirement contributions. On paper, I was doing everything right. But I would be lying if I said I did not feel something twist in my stomach that day. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was missing something everyone else understood. Maybe I was so focused on stability that I forgot what comfort felt like. That night, I walked past a furniture store on my way home. In the window was this deep blue couch. Plush. Clean. The kind of couch adults with real lives owned. Mine was a hand-me-down from Craigslist with springs that made noise when I sat down. I stood there longer than I should have. I could buy it. Easily. It would not even dent my savings. But then I imagined the spreadsheet. The line item. The way my monthly savings rate would dip, even slightly. I kept walking. It was a small thing. No one saw it. No one knew I wanted that couch. That was the pattern. The outside world saw restraint. They saw a guy who never upgraded, never splurged, never loosened up. What they did not see were the quiet negotiations in my head every single day. I told myself I was building something. I just was not sure yet what that something would have to protect me from. And the truth is, a part of me was still afraid. Not of spending, of slipping. Because what no one at that brewery table knew was that my father had once told me, after his second layoff, that the scariest feeling in the world was not being poor. It was realizing you had been comfortable 5 minutes ago. I promised myself I would never feel that drop. I just did not realize yet what that promise was going to cost me, or what it would eventually give back. And the first real test of that promise was closer than I thought. The first real test came the year promotions started rolling in. It was my 4th year at the firm. I had kept my head down, worked long hours, and avoided office politics the way some people avoid carbs. When my manager called me into his office and told me I was getting bumped up to senior analyst, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Pride. It came with a decent raise. Not life-changing money, but enough to shift things. Enough that people around me started talking about the next step. That phrase followed me everywhere. Next step apartment. Next step car. Next step lifestyle. My friend Marcus was promoted the same week. By the end of the month, he had signed a lease in a new building with a rooftop pool and a gym that looked like a professional training facility. He invited all of us over for a housewarming party. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Stainless steel, everything. A balcony that overlooked the skyline. As I stood there holding a cup of cheap beer I brought myself, he clapped me on the back and asked when I was upgrading. I laughed it off, said I liked my place. He looked genuinely confused. You can afford better now. That word, better. I drove home that night to my old building with the creaky elevator and the hallway that always smelled faintly like someone's overcooked dinner. I unlocked my door and stepped into my small studio. The couch dipped in the middle. The kitchen was barely a strip of counter space. It was not glamorous, but it was mine, and it cost less than half of what Marcus was paying. I opened my laptop and pulled up my spreadsheet. With the raise, I could increase my investment contributions by another 5%. I could shave years off whatever long-term plan I was building. Still, I found myself browsing apartment listings. Just looking, I told myself. There was something seductive about those photos. Clean lines. Sunlight pouring through windows. The promise of a new version of myself. A man who hosted dinner parties. A man who did not have to explain why he still drove a car from over a decade ago. The next week at work, someone joked that I was probably hoarding my raise like a dragon guarding gold. Another guy said I was going to die with $1 million and no stories. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, but the word stuck. Was I collecting security at the expense of experience? That night, I did something I rarely did. I ran the numbers on what it would actually cost to upgrade. New rent, higher utilities, parking fees, furnishing a bigger space. It was not just the apartment. It was the lifestyle that came with it. The difference was not small. If I moved, my savings rate would drop by almost 30%. 30%. That number felt heavier than any comment. So I stayed. The next few months were full of subtle reminders that I was out of step. Group trips I declined. A new phone release I ignored. Coworkers comparing lease payments like badges of honor. Then something happened I did not expect. Marcus came into work one morning looking tired. Not just sleepy. Drained. He mentioned offhand that the rent increase notice had arrived. The building was adjusting to market rates. His payment was going up by several $100s a month. He laughed, but it sounded forced. He said it would be tight for a while. I nodded, trying not to show the flicker of validation that passed through me. For the first time, I saw the other side of better. But instead of feeling superior, I felt uneasy. Because if I was honest, I still wanted that skyline view. And I had to ask myself a question I had been avoiding. Was I choosing stability because it was wise, or because it felt safer than risking even a little discomfort? I did not know it yet, but that question was about to follow me into something much bigger than an apartment lease. The real fracture started with a plane ticket. It was early spring when Tyler announced he was turning 30 in Miami. He rented a place near the beach, sent a group message with a link to flights and a breakdown of shared costs. The numbers were not outrageous. A few hundred for airfare, a few hundred more for the house, then food, drinks, whatever happened after midnight. Come on, man, he texted me separately. It will not be the same without you. I stared at the message longer than I should have. I could afford it. That was the uncomfortable truth. My savings had crossed $75,000 by then. Investments were compounding quietly in the background. My emergency fund could handle almost a year of expenses. But when I added up the full weekend in my head, I saw more than beaches and birthday candles. I saw the opportunity cost. That money, invested, growing. That small delay in whatever future freedom I was building. I told myself I would think about it. For a week, the group chat buzzed with excitement. Screenshots of swimsuits. Jokes about bottle service. Someone booked a yacht for half a day and split the cost across everyone going. My share would be just under $2,000 for the entire trip. $2,000. I opened my spreadsheet and created a hypothetical line item. Miami. Then I ran the projection tool I had built for myself. If I invested that same amount instead, compounded over the next 20 years at a conservative rate, it would grow into something that felt significant. The future version of me nodded in approval. The present version felt tired. At work, Marcus asked if I had booked my flight yet. I told him I was not sure I could make it. He frowned like I had just admitted something embarrassing. "You are always not sure," he said. "At some point you have to live." That night, I lay on my sagging couch and scrolled through photos of Miami online. Blue water, open sky, people laughing without looking at the price of their cocktails. For a moment, I imagined myself there. Not calculating, not tracking, just existing. Then I thought about my dad. When I was 16, he got a severance check after the factory shut down. For a few months, we breathed easier. We ate out a little more. He bought a new television, the first new one we had ever owned. He said we deserved it after everything. 6 months later, the money was gone. No new job. The television still sat in the living room, bright and mocking. I remembered the look on his face when the savings account hit zero. Not anger, not panic, just disbelief at how fast comfort disappears. That memory is louder than any group chat. I told Tyler I could not make it. Said I had work deadlines. It was easier than explaining the truth. He replied with a thumbs up. No argument. Just a subtle shift. The weekend they were in Miami, my social media was a highlight reel of sunburned smiles and champagne bottles. I spent those days cleaning my apartment, meal prepping for the week, and reviewing my quarterly budget. On Sunday night, I transferred the exact amount I would have spent on the trip into my brokerage account. It felt responsible. It also felt lonely. The following Monday, the guys came back with stories. Inside jokes. Photos of the yacht. Someone lost a wallet. Someone met someone. They kept referencing moments I could not picture. I nodded along, pretending I did not feel the distance widening. That was the first time I seriously questioned myself. Not because I regretted the money, because I realized that discipline has a social cost no one warns you about. From the outside, it looked like I chose to save $2,000. What I actually gave up was something less measurable, and I had no idea how many more of those trade-offs were waiting for me. The next test was not a vacation. It was a wedding. Marcus got engaged that summer. Big venue. Downtown hotel ballroom. Black tie optional, which really meant required if you did not want to look out of place. When the invitation arrived, I felt genuinely happy for him. He had worked hard. He and Claire seemed solid. I wanted to show up for that. Then I saw the registry. It was not outrageous by most standards. Just elevated. High-end cookware. Designer bedding. A coffee machine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The average gift price hovered around $500. I sat at my kitchen counter and stared at the list. I could afford $500. Easily. But I knew myself. It would not stop at $500. There would be the tux rental, the hotel room, the bachelor dinner, transportation. It all stacked up. By the time I added everything in my head, the weekend would land close to $1,500. At work, people compared what they were buying like it was part of the celebration. Someone joked that anything under $500 looked cheap. I felt that word again. Cheap. That night, I opened my spreadsheet and created another hypothetical line. Wedding weekend. I watched the projection model adjust. One small dip in contributions. One small delay in compounding. On paper, it barely moved the needle. In my chest, it felt heavier. I ended up buying a mid-range gift. Not the top-tier espresso machine. A solid set of cookware instead. $300. At the wedding, everything was polished. Crystal chandeliers. Waiters in white gloves. I congratulated Marcus, hugged Claire, smiled for photos. Later in the evening, after a few drinks, one of our co-workers nudged me and asked what I had gifted. I told him. He laughed and said, "Man, I thought you would have gone bigger. You have the cash." He meant it casually, but it landed like a verdict. I stood there, watching the dance floor fill up, and for a second I wondered if they were right. Maybe I was limiting myself out of fear. Maybe generosity was supposed to stretch you a little. On the drive home, I replayed the comment in my head. I told myself I was being consistent, that discipline was not supposed to bend for appearances. Still, when I got back to my apartment and hung up the rented tux, I felt something uncomfortable. Not regret about the money, doubt about the identity. Was I becoming the guy everyone expected to hold back? And if so, was that who I wanted to be? The real turning point did not come from a party or a wedding. It came from a sound, a grinding, uneven sound from the front of my car one Tuesday morning on the way to work. My Honda had never been glamorous, but it had been loyal. I kept up with maintenance. Oil changes on schedule. Tires rotated. No unnecessary upgrades. It was practical. Paid off. When the mechanic called later that afternoon, his voice had that careful tone people use when they know the number will hurt. Transmission issues. Worn components. It was drivable for now, but not for long. The repair estimate was just under $4,000. $4,000. I thanked him, hung up, and just sat at my desk staring at the wall. Around me, coworkers were talking about a new electric SUV that had just come out. Marcus had mentioned he was thinking of trading in his car for something bigger now that he and Claire were talking about kids. For a brief, dangerous moment, I thought, maybe this is the excuse. Maybe this is when I upgrade. I could walk into a dealership, put down a solid payment, and drive off in something new. No weird noises. No dents. No judgmental looks in the parking garage. I even looked up a few models that night. Ran the financing numbers. Monthly payments. Insurance increase. Depreciation. The spreadsheet told the truth immediately. A new car would not just cost the sticker price. It would quietly redirect hundreds of dollars a month away from investments and into a machine that would lose value the second I drove it home. Still, I felt tired of being the practical one. Tired of explaining why I kept things longer than everyone else. I imagined pulling into work in something sleek. Windows tinted. Paint shining. No one joking about my vintage ride anymore. Then I imagined something else. What if I lost my job tomorrow? That thought had never fully left me. Not since watching my father sit at the kitchen table with severance papers in his hand. I opened my banking app and looked at my emergency fund. It could cover the repair 10 times over without touching investments. The next morning, I approved the repair. When I picked up the car, the mechanic told me I could probably get another 5 years out of it if I kept taking care of it. 5 years. I drove home in silence, listening carefully. The grinding was gone. The car felt steady again. No one at work noticed anything different. That should have felt disappointing. Instead, something subtle shifted. For the first time, I realized my discipline was not about denying myself a nicer car. It was about buying myself options. The repair barely made a dent in my savings. A new car would have reshaped my entire monthly life. That night, I updated my spreadsheet. The numbers still lined up. The trajectory still held. But underneath the calculations, a new question started forming. If something bigger ever happened, something none of us saw coming, would I be ready? I had no idea how soon I would get that answer. It happened on a Thursday morning. No warning. No slow decline. Just a calendar invite titled Department Update. I had seen enough corporate emails to know what that meant. By 10 in the morning, half the floor was quiet. Managers walking people into glass conference rooms. Doors closing gently. Faces pale when they came back out carrying cardboard boxes. When my turn came, I felt strangely calm. Maybe it was the years of running worst-case scenarios in my head. Maybe it was the memory of my father's severance envelope. My manager did not look me in the eye for long. Market conditions. Restructuring. Tough decisions. My role had been eliminated effective immediately. There it was. The drop my father had described. Except this time, I did not feel like I was falling. I felt steady. They offered a modest severance. Health coverage for a few months. Standard exit package. I shook hands. Thanked them. Packed my desk into a single box. A framed photo of my parents. A coffee mug. A notebook filled with budget projections and side ideas I had never had time to explore. In the elevator, I expected panic to set in. It did not. Instead, my brain went straight to numbers. Emergency fund, fully funded. Investments, untouched. Monthly expenses, low. I could live for close to a year without earning a dollar. When I stepped outside into the afternoon air, I saw Marcus across the street. He had been let go too. His face was tight, jaw clenched. We grabbed coffee at a place nearby. He admitted his new rent was stretching them thin already. Claire was stressed. The car payment did not pause just because his income did. He laughed, but it was brittle. I should have saved more, he said quietly. I did not say anything. For the first time, my so-called monk budget did not feel like something to defend. It felt like armor. That night, in my small apartment with the creaky floors and the sagging couch, I opened my spreadsheet again. I adjusted the income column to 0. The model did not collapse. The lines shifted, but they held. I lay back and stared at the ceiling. This was the moment everyone had warned me about without realizing it. The comfort disappearing in 5 minutes. Except it had not. Because for years, while they saw deprivation, I had been building margin. And margin, I was starting to understand, is a kind of freedom that only reveals itself when everything else shakes. Still, as calm as I felt, there was one thing I did not expect. Without the job, without the routine, I had nothing but time. And time has a way of forcing you to confront whether you were preparing for something real or just hiding behind numbers. The next decision I made would answer that. The first week after the layoff felt almost like a strange vacation. I woke up without an alarm, made coffee slowly, sat by the window of my small apartment, and watched the street come alive without needing to rush anywhere. For years, I had told myself I was building toward freedom. Now I had a glimpse of it. But freedom without direction can turn into drift. By the second week, the silence started pressing in. I updated my resume, sent out applications, scheduled a few interviews. The job market was tighter than I expected. Companies were cautious. Budgets frozen. Positions on hold. Every rejection email felt polite and distant. Meanwhile, I tracked my expenses like always. Rent, utilities, groceries. They barely moved. My lifestyle, once mocked as restrictive, now felt efficient. There was no luxury lease draining my account. No car payment demanding attention. No credit card balance growing quietly in the background. One afternoon, Marcus called. He sounded exhausted. He had picked up contract work, but it paid less than his old salary. He mentioned they were considering moving to a smaller place if things did not stabilize. I wish I had your setup, he admitted. You always kept it lean. I stared at my worn kitchen counter after we hung up. Lean. For years, that word had felt like an accusation. Now it felt like strategy. Still, something unexpected happened during those quiet months. With no office to go to, no meetings to sit through, I found myself revisiting an idea I had shelved years ago. A small consulting service focused on budgeting and financial planning for young professionals. Not flashy investing advice. Not aggressive trading. Just structure. Systems. Clarity. I had built tools for myself for years. Projection models. Expense trackers. Risk scenarios. Friends used to joke that I should charge for my spreadsheets. Maybe they were not entirely wrong. One evening, I pulled out my old notebook from work. The one filled with half-finished ideas. I started refining them. Cleaning up the language. Designing something simple and practical. The irony was not lost on me. The very habits people had teased me for were now the foundation of something potentially real. But doubt crept in. Was I playing it too safe again? Building something small instead of chasing something bold? I could afford to take a risk. My savings gave me runway. That realization felt almost surreal. For the first time in my adult life, I was not reacting to fear. I was choosing. That night, I transferred a modest amount from my savings into a separate account labeled venture. It was not a reckless move. It was calculated. But it was different. Because this time, discipline was not about holding back. It was about giving myself permission to try. And I had no idea how quickly that small experiment would change the way everyone saw me, or how little I would care by then. The first person to pay me was not a stranger. It was Tyler, the same guy who once called my budget monk mode at the brewery. We met for coffee one afternoon. He looked different than he had in Miami photos months earlier. A little worn down. He had kept his job, but inflation hit, rent went up, and credit card balances had quietly grown. I do not get it, he said, staring into his cup. I make good money, but it disappears. For years, I would have nodded politely and kept my system to myself. I never wanted to be the preachy guy. This time, I told him about what I was building. A simple structure. Income buckets. Automated transfers. Clear visibility on fixed versus variable spending. No shaming. No extreme restrictions. Just awareness and intentionality. He raised an eyebrow. You are serious? I nodded. I will pay you, he said after a pause. If it works. We agreed on a modest fee. Not enough to change my life, but enough to make it real. That night, I sat at my small kitchen table and walked him through his numbers. No judgment. Just facts. Subscriptions he forgot about. Interest compounding against him. Lifestyle creep that happened inch by inch. By the end of 2 hours, he looked both embarrassed and relieved. I never actually looked at it like this, he admitted. We set up automated systems. Emergency fund goal. Debt payoff timeline. A small, fun account so he did not feel trapped. Over the next few weeks, he sent me updates. Credit card balance shrinking, savings growing, stress dropping. Then something unexpected happened. He told Marcus. Marcus called me next. Then one of Marcus's friends. Within 3 months, I had 10 clients. Then 15. Not because I promised them early retirement. Not because I sold some fantasy. Because I offered what most of them had never built. Structure. The irony was almost funny. The same discipline that once made me the butt of jokes was now the reason people trusted me. At a small gathering one evening, someone introduced me differently. This is Daniel. He is the guy who actually has his finances together. No laughter followed. No smirks. Just interest. But the real shift did not happen in the room. It happened inside me. For the first time, I was not defending my choices. I was standing on them. My savings had barely moved during unemployment. My expenses stayed low. And now, income was trickling back in on my terms. I still lived in the same apartment, drove the same car. From the outside, nothing flashy had changed. But internally, something had solidified. Discipline was no longer just about protection. It was leverage. And the real turning point, the moment everything clicked for good, was still ahead. The email came on a quiet Tuesday morning. Subject line, acquisition inquiry. At first, I assumed it was spam. Over the past year, my small consulting service had grown steadily. Nothing viral. Nothing dramatic. Just referrals, word of mouth, consistent results. I had built simple digital tools around my spreadsheets, clean dashboards, automated trackers, educational guides. By then, I had over 100 active clients. Still, I operated from the same apartment. Same car. Same simple routines. The email was from a mid-sized financial technology company. They had noticed my platform. They liked the retention numbers, the engagement rates, the way clients stuck around. They wanted to talk. I reread the message 3 times before replying. The first call felt surreal. They asked questions about growth potential, scalability, licensing. I answered calmly, even though my pulse was loud in my ears. A week later, they sent a preliminary offer. The number made me lean back in my chair. It was more money than I had ever seen attached to my name. Enough to cover decades of my modest living expenses. Enough to change my financial trajectory permanently. I closed my laptop and just sat there. For years, people had assumed my discipline came from fear. That I was hoarding. That I was limiting myself. But the truth was this. Because my lifestyle was lean, because my needs were low, I did not feel desperate. I did not have to accept. That was the power I had quietly built. I ran the numbers, of course, modeled different scenarios. If I sold, invested conservatively, and maintained my current expenses, I could technically stop working full-time. Financial independence. The phrase I had never said out loud. When I told Tyler and Marcus about the offer, their reactions were different than years before. No jokes. No teasing. Just stunned silence. Marcus shook his head slowly. You were not being cheap, he said. You were building. The funny part was how little that validation mattered in that moment. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel like I had won some competition. I felt calm. Because whether I sold or not, I knew something deeper. My stability was not tied to the sale. It was built long before the offer arrived. For years, discipline had looked like deprivation to everyone else. Now it looked like leverage. But the real realization came later that night, sitting alone in my apartment, staring at the familiar dent in the wall near the window. The money was significant, but it was not the point. The point was that quiet consistency had compounded in ways loud confidence never could. And for the first time, I fully understood what I had been building toward all along. I did not celebrate the offer with champagne. I did not go apartment hunting. I did not test drive a new car. Instead, I went for a walk. It was early evening. The air was cool. The same streets I had walked for years looked unchanged. Same corner store. Same cracked sidewalks. Same old brick buildings catching the last light of the day. I thought about every small decision that had led here. The water at the brewery. The apartment I did not upgrade. The Miami trip I skipped. The car I repaired instead of replacing. None of those moments looked heroic. None of them felt dramatic. They were just consistent. From the outside, discipline had looked like lack. Friends assumed I was afraid. Family members used to ask when I was going to start enjoying my life. Coworkers thought I was hoarding money for no reason. I never argued much. It was exhausting to explain a long-term plan to people living in short-term cycles. The truth is, I doubted myself plenty of times. I stood in front of that blue couch years ago and wanted it. I scrolled through beach photos and felt the pull. I imagined pulling into the office parking garage in something shiny and new. Every no cost something. But here is what no one sees from the outside. Every no also built something invisible. Margin, options, time. When I got laid off, I did not panic. When I started my own venture, I did not need investors breathing down my neck. When the acquisition offer arrived, I did not feel trapped into accepting it. Because my life did not require a certain income to survive. I ended up negotiating instead of jumping at the first number. Not out of greed. Out of clarity. I understood what my work was worth. I understood what my time was worth. That is the part people rarely talk about. When you live below your means long enough, money stops controlling your decisions. It becomes a tool instead of a leash. A few weeks later, I met Tyler and Marcus again at that same brewery downtown. This time, I ordered a beer. No one commented. No one joked about monk budgets. Marcus asked me if I was moving into a high-rise now. I smiled and told him I liked my place. And I meant it. The shift in how they saw me was obvious. There was respect where there used to be teasing. Curiosity where there used to be doubt. But what surprised me most was how little that shift mattered. Because the real change had already happened quietly over the years. I trusted myself. Not in a loud, confident way. Not in a flashy, social media-ready way. In a steady way. I knew I could say yes when I wanted to. I knew I could say no when I needed to. I knew I could weather storms without collapsing. Quiet consistency compounds. Not just in bank accounts. In identity. In self-trust. And standing there in that same city, with the same dented car and the same modest apartment waiting for me, I realized something simple. I was never building a bigger life for other people to admire. I was building a stable one for myself to stand on. And that foundation, laid brick by brick in silence, turned out to be worth more than any skyline view ever could.